Yeah.
So brands just don't go for her. And it's like, she is 5-time world champion. And that's what I worry about athletes, is that if you're not this big extroverted person who loves being on their phone, you are hindered, no matter how good you are as an athlete.
Yeah.
You just won't get the backing because people are so focused on the exposure of their brand, which I understand from their perspective, but yeah, there's a balance.
I love that you've basically raised that, because I feel that with the rise in investment of women in sport, of how much it's going to be, you know, it's going to be one of the biggest revenue builders to come. I actually have some figures that I thought I'd bring to the table, which I hope you don't mind me sharing.
No, go for it.
But on, so it's the Business Case for Women's Sports podcast, which is quite a long title, but there we go. Basically, a new report from Deloitte came out. So this was back in December 2023. That predicts that for the first time in history, women's professional sports will generate over $1 billion in global revenue. So the growth of women's sport is happening quickly. Per Deloitte, the industry saw $695 million in revenue in 2022, and that increased by nearly another $300 million in 2023, and now is projected to see $1.28 billion in global revenue in 2024. And I'm like, okay, wow, these numbers sound really impressive, but I was like, I need to understand what it is from men's sport, like sport generally,
contextually,
women's away from that. And I can't guarantee that these stats necessarily are just men alone, but sports industry revenue worldwide in 2022 was $486.61 billion in 2022. So when you subtract what women's was in 2022, that's take away just 695 million.
Doesn't even make a dent, does it?
Not a dent. And that gives me shivers.
Yeah.
Because that's how you understand the comparison and the different. And a lot of people say, well, it shouldn't be women in sport as a separate thing. But it's like, but we need to see the growth to go back to the point of athletes and social media, for brands to see how they can help and where money really should be invested in. I wholeheartedly believe that as an athlete, you are focused on that sport. You shouldn't have to be forced into getting into things like social media or being on camera if you don't necessarily want to. That's not what you signed up to growing up, etc. Although it is part of professionalism growing up, essentially. But what I'm trying to get at is that a brand should invest. So a brand should see that Hannah is this incredible winning champion athlete time again. Invest in her and do the social media for her. Talk to her, find a balance, get someone to run it for her, and then that brand has no problem then with the credibility of that voice. That's how I see the world and how it should work.
Yeah. No, I think it's...
So if anybody wants to do it for me, then they're more than welcome to.
I feel like that kind of... So based off that and your stats and how we've projected the growth, what do you think the future of women's sports looks like in the next 2, 3, 5 years?
Yeah.
What do you think?
A big part of me sees that it can only get better from now. Like the last year plus has just been super exciting. I think it's really hard to judge when so many sports in industries are different and they're so compared to one another. Like, you know, football Lioness is absolutely amazing, but that success cannot be compared to extreme sport, which has a completely different level of spotlight, etc. Especially when globally there's still a lot of issues that take into effect. But I really hope that the invested interest, and I believe that it will only continue to inspire, and it can only get bigger and better to the point where I'm watching Sky Sports News or in the morning or whatever, and I'm not just seeing football news, but I'm seeing BMX news perhaps. I know there are different avenues and channels for that, but why is it that I can't even just like turn to the back of a newspaper to read the sports section and just see more variety? You don't need to see that. There's so many ways to research and Google headline sports that have had headlines forever. That there's, why not shape it up and shake it around and have other options. I I really hope that grassroots level and community level sports continue to grow and they really get the focus and the attention and the care they need, because childhood is everything. And I hope I hope the rise of women's sport really does go full circle. I believe it will. It'll go back to the beginnings. I see it with England netball. They are doing so many incredible things to embrace not only children but also women and men who want to return to the sport or try something new, this is what it's about. This is what it's about, encouraging and letting people like experience something and doing something new. So I can only see with also the rise in health, fitness, obsession of different types of things, like even the gym is that sport, High Rocks is a sport, CrossFit is sport, so many different new elements of moving that can only mean that there's just one way for it, and that is getting bigger and better. What would you compare sport to in terms of industry?
It's kind of unique, that's the thing. There's nothing that really replicates it, especially with fandom, because it's just built into its culture, its family, I can't really compare it. Like people in football, like, why do you support that team? Well, my grandfather supported it. You know, in what world would you go, oh, what brand do you use for this? It's like, well, my grandfather used that, so I use that brand. It's not really the same. Fandom is just its own unique world and sports fans. So I just don't think it can really be compared. And that's what I love about it. It genuinely, I think, is an industry that can genuinely make a difference in the world. Like you can see, you know, the difference in how women's sport is being perceived. That has been going on for years, but it's fast-tracked in a couple of years, you know, to make such a difference in social ideology, sport, and how that's what it's achieved for women's sport. I can't really see that replicated in a lot of other places.
No.
So, yeah.
That was a stunning soundbite. Got goosebumps there. You know, and you're so right. I think what will happen over the next 5 years then is the increased exposure, increased interest, more men also investing in women's sport. Love seeing men watching women's sport.
Yeah.
You know, you go to some basketball games, women's game will play first, or like sometimes that happens with rugby, and the stadium's empty. Why?
Yeah.
The event itself is so outstanding. Commit to getting there to watch both matches. It really doesn't take that much, and you're just getting more for your money. You're getting two incredible matches for your money. And the live sport presenting that I do, I think I love and get so much kick out of that, because it is about the live event experience. And with the COVID thing that happened and everyone's returning to the event, it's like, yes, go and actually do something and be there in the moment. Amazing that there's broadcast and there's more media attention around these sports, but actually being able to go is such a different experience. And as you say, with fandom, it just creates something different itself, cultures of like, you know, new stunning ways of communities building, friendships forming, and the invested interest. Like, when would you like want to like learn about the history of, like, say, netball, for instance? And we spoke about this. Sue Amstis's, she's got the Netflix film. I want to say Game Changers. Can I just check that? I can't get it wrong because her podcast is called that. Let me just quickly check. Sue Amstis, Netflix. Game On. Yes. Go back. Sue Amstis's Netflix documentary, Game On, explains the history of sport, and I had no idea why netball was invented. And the forgive me because if you already know this because you've watched it, but just to go back on it, she basically goes back to history and talks about why football was invented in the Industrial Revolution. It was basically a way to get men out of their minds to be able to exercise. Men went to war. Women then played the sport so they could keep up with the amazing success of the sports of the football league. Men came back, women were banned, and then netball was invented to allow women to express their right to exercise in restricted zones. And that is why we have rules to this game, and that has been echoed so much in society, etc., and other sports and things. And then so fast forward to 2024 and to see where the sport of netball is going in particular, it's like, wow. But then but also women have had to do so much to get to that point of just expression and acceptance and just being able to go out and do that thing.
Yeah. I knew about women's football being banned, but I didn't know then that a consequence of that was netball being created. That's wild.
The link between the two.
Yeah. And back what you go to say about, like the 100, you'll have the women's game first and then the men's, but the women's game is always empty. Part of our key messaging for She Moves the Game is, I think people are arguing around the same thing. Men and women's sport isn't comparable. Like, yes, there are biological differences, The average woman is shorter than the average male. That's why I think football is so much more impressive, because these women who aren't as physically advantaged in certain areas to men are still playing on the same size pitch, are still shooting in the same goals. Compare the average goalkeeper of a male compared to a female standing in the goal. It's so much harder to be a goalkeeper in women's football. And that's what we're trying to champion is, we're never going to win the battle that women's sport is comparable to men's, because it's not. But it's just as impressive, if not more impressive.
Preach.
Yeah. So
Preach,
that's
Jess.
what we're trying to push.
You heard it first.
Yeah, you have the likes of people being like, oh, well, men can run faster and be more powerful. It's like, but women is just as impressive. It is different. That is fine. And we need to celebrate those differences. It's just as impressive.
Totally. I think it's a really weak response if a man or a woman is to come to say, but women a week or whatever. And it's like, well, it's still mega impressive. I think that's, especially with the BMX, I need to understand what this is like for a woman.
Yeah.
It's terrifying going down a ramp, and then you're seeing women doing all of the incredible tricks that the guys are doing too. Physicality, maybe not hitting the same marks or as high, etc.
Yeah.
But when you have the commentators like Tim Wood and Sebastian on the BBC commentary for Cycling World Champs, or Catfish the MC, they are celebrating and championing those big moments, right? When the women are hitting those tricks as the same as they would with the men. And I think that says there's a lot of duty and responsibility in media.
100%. In
how we totally embrace and focus on those moments, and none of this stuff, because she's a woman. I remember back in, I think it was the Sochi Winter Olympics, or it could have been Pyeongchang, there was an issue with the snowboarders. For whatever reason, the broadcasters putting their weight on the stats on the lower third.
Oh my God.
And
how's that relevant?
Oh my God, honestly, zero relevance. And so I always check little things like that now. I'm like, what is different about the way that they're broadcasting women to men? And X Games just recently blew me out. I was watching it. It was on in the middle of the night in the UK, but I was like, I need to watch it and see this, because our women snowboarders, Mia Brooks, getting the gold for her discipline was just iconic. And to be able to see how far the sport has come since we had Jamie Anderson totally annihilating it at the Olympics back in 2014-18, it's just amazing. And it's goodbye the days of weak journalism and not caring the fact that you stupidly just put on your weight. No one needs that. No. It's ridiculous.
It's not relevant to the sport. Fine if it's weightlifting, because I think there is relevance, but ridiculous. There's actually a piece we're doing, just a side note, at Red Torch and part of She Moves the Game. We did it with World Athletics, but World Athletics have pledged to do more research into women's sport. So we compared the top 8 male and female athletes, looked at their social media following versus their coverage on the news, and men had proportionately more coverage on the news, despite women having far bigger social media followings. So therefore leaning into the awareness, being right, these are the people with the biggest social media followings, awareness, popularity, yet you're focusing on the men. And then World Athletics with us dived a bit more into that and looked at why that was, and then have been working directly with Google to update their algorithms. So when you're looking at search terms, it's bringing up a lot more gender equity between men and women's coverage, and then they're also directly working with press as well to then be like, you need to cover more of these stories, and actually like working directly with journalists to give them the stories and the headlines, because
you did that.
So our research team worked with World Athletics and did the base level, and then had given it to World Athletics and been on calls with Google to then tell them, be like, you need to change the algorithm.
That is what I'm on about. That is the change that is needed to highlight the discrepancies and the issues there. That is honourable, and that needs to be highlighted. That to me is a headline news story right there. That is so iconic.
Yeah.
And as you say, it just goes to show lazy research that can go into some things and how quick we are just to go on what we see. I fall short of doing it sometimes, especially if you're like, you don't have enough time to prep or something, you're just seeing what's right in front of you.
Yeah.
As opposed to doing like, oh no, what are the stories that I don't know about? Because there are the diamonds in the rough.
100%. Yeah.
Oh, wow, that is really amazing that you've done that.
It's great. Yeah, because we were talking to England and Wales cricket about it, and she was like, I find that crazy because I think it was last year when the England women were about to face Australia, and for the first time ever they were going to potentially beat them in the T20, and they opened up the Evening Standard, and there was no coverage of this potential huge match where England women could, break down the history of Australia's cricket team. And I think she rang up, her name's Jo, she rang up the Evening Standard and was like, this is an absolute disgrace. This is a huge match, playing at Lord's, I believe, and why is there zero coverage? And they apologised, and they've been making amends to then give women's cricket and women's sport more coverage.
Incredible.
But you got to call it out, otherwise nothing will change. So
someone's got to see it.
Yeah.
Someone's got to see it. I think that's definitely